Looted.
This is an opinion, as he says. I think that George Floyd, along with a lot of people, are just simply, you get somebody who's a drug addict. He's at the end of his rope. He has no hope. He has nowhere to go. He's really not going to turn around and change to be a better part of society because, frankly, he kind of can't. I know that's hard to believe, but he's just at a point in his life where he's out of options. At this point, we've shut down most of the country where we're now riling up people who feel like they're useless, they don't have any value, they're completely out of options, and now we're telling them to burn down cities.
Yeah.
We're telling them they're not worthy, and we're telling them not only that, but that they are, in fact, this man.
Right. And you know what else? You know what people die from? It's
What?
not just loneliness. And we've made people
Absolutely they
lonely.
do.
It takes way more time off your life than COVID, statistically. If you look at it, if you look at the mean age of death, I'm not saying COVID is not deadly. I'm saying people who are lonely, particularly in their older age, they die much sooner. Just like people who actually live in 2-story homes live longer once you get to a certain age. These are basic facts of life. Loneliness, mental health issues, drug addiction. I don't agree with you. They didn't have any other options. I mean, you had options. Look, you're someone who you've been open about that you were an addict, and I think everyone has a choice at some point, and this is George Floyd who chose this right now. Look, there are several choices there. Counterfeit 20s, doing drugs, hanging around with the same people, committing more crimes. There are people who've had worse stories than George Floyd who've come out of it. I never believe that someone is completely out of options, and certainly not from what I've read with George Floyd. He opted for that because it was the easier money.
No, I think he believed it. That's my point.
Oh,
I'm not
believed
saying
it.
that he
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
but I think he believed that.
Right. Well, why do you think he believes it? Because people like Maxine Waters tell him that's your only option. Because people like Joe Biden say that's your only option. White people bad, everyone's holding you down, everyone's holding you back. They don't tell you, look, right now in places in Florida, they are paying you $50 to show up for a job interview at McDonald's. We can have the news team back there. In fact, bring it up. $50 to show up for an interview.
Wow.
Because people won't show up right now. They don't want to work.
Wow.
They feel
government money
comfortable
is too
enough
good.
with the government money. That's a big problem. That's
Which
why there's
we
a
warned
shortage
about.
right now.
Excuse me, I'm going to McDonald's.
Wait, is that true? Is that
Gonna
true?
go
What?
sign up for a ton of interviews and
I'm getting free
No,
shakes.
I agree. But I agree. He thinks he doesn't have options.
Correct.
The issue is,
And I'm
he
speaking
does.
from an addict point of view.
Yes.
Well,
and
he's
where
got
he's
a
at.
medical problem, right? Drug addiction is not just a mental problem. It is or a brain issue, like choosing right. It is a medical issue.
Right.
It has to be treated as such.
Yeah.
And it's treated as punishment. And I understand that because a lot of it is a crime. But when you are a drug felon and all that, everything that he had happening to him, it is very, very hard to make a transition
Yeah.
to think you're not useless. Not everybody's Danny
But
Trejo.
that being
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
that being said, there are plenty of people with drug problems, and there are plenty of people with drug problems who commit crimes to try and get their next fix. There's a big
100%.
There's a big difference between that and scoping out a house with a mom who you know is vulnerable, going in with a gang with guns and putting her at gunpoint, jamming it into her stomach in front of her kid. That is not. I'm out of options. That's a sinister bastard.
Have you smoked crack?
Hey, I love this from Business Insider.
I'm just trying to.
A McDonald's in Florida is paying people $50 just to show up for a job interview, but it's still not attracting many applicants.
Oh,
Wow.
not good enough. I
50's
say.
not enough.
Not enough.
I
No
would work the
options.
system.
No
I
options.
would go just for the $50.
Yeah, get your next score.
And then they'd call me and I'd be like, I'm not going to work at McDonald's. I'm not a loser. I'm kidding. I'm
And then you'd be
joking.
like, oh, really?
Relax.
Oh, really? After only 6 months, these are your employee benefits? Those are competitive.
Yeah.
Next thing I get a call. Yeah, Dave, you're quitting.
Yep.
Yeah. I have a sister who went through this. I understand that they will make you do things that you would
Sure.
never, ever think that you would do. Mentally, it puts you in a place where you're no longer making the decisions like you normally would. And that's not an excuse. That's a warning. Don't start using drugs unless you want to end up in a really, really bad place.
Yes, and I've
You're
had a lot of
100% right.
and I've
for
had
too.
experience with it too. I mean, my dad
Yeah.
had a guy who we tried to help for a long time.
Yeah.
Steal his truck, and then actually we found out had a pair of razors and some rope.
I remember that, yeah.
And that being said, drugs don't make you premeditatedly violent. In other words, there are a lot of people who do drugs who try and figure out a way to do, petty robbery, something
Yeah.
like that, pickpocketing, stealing a car. Typically speaking, someone who is doing drugs, who doesn't want to hurt someone else but wants to get more drugs, will at least try those first. Not show up with a gang of guys with guns, scoping out the most vulnerable among us. And jamming a gun in a woman's stomach. That is not something that look, just like when people say, hey, you have mental health issues, you shouldn't have access to a gun. Well, I have people in my family who are bipolar. You know what happens? They get really quiet and sad, and then sometimes they're really fun to be around. Doesn't mean they shouldn't have the right to own a firearm.
Yeah.
Just like when we say drug addicts, not all drug addicts are marauding, violent thugs. George Floyd chose to be that. And I think that we need to differentiate between, you're not, and there's also a difference between, your executive functioning and, impulsivity. That's not impulsivity.
I think there is, though, a way where you can weigh in where he comes from. A lot of drug addicts aren't violent, but a lot of drug addicts come from money. And I mean, depending on how long that you have this drug in you and how much it overtakes you, there's just a piece of your soul going away every single day.
Yeah.
And Gerald's right. It will make you do things like that you may think you could never do. He could believe that I'm going in there and I'm not being violent because I'm not actually going to hurt her. That could be whatever mental gymnastics you need to use to get that fixed.
Sure.
Now, that doesn't excuse it, and that doesn't mean you
not at
shouldn't
all.
be in prison.
Right.
Because it certainly means you should be in prison if you cross that line.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a treatment that for people on drugs, especially if they're going to be on the street the way that they are now, where it's either not completely locked up in prison or a separate drug prison or a rehab that's actually affordable.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
But I think it's important because
we
this
do have
shit
those.
happens when we don't pay attention to the root of the problem, which, like you said, loneliness, drug addiction, and then when you pepper in
Well,
being
the
locked
root of the problem is
inside-
they just said family. I'm willing to bet didn't have a dad around. George Floyd
Of course.
George Floyd wasn't a dad to his kids, so it perpetuates that vicious cycle.
I'll tell you right now, I was a great kid who did very well in school up until my dad died, or at least my dad got very sick and was out of the house.
Yeah.
Probably
I'm an
different.
exact example of that
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there wasn't somebody there that I needed.
Right.
And I understand that, and I understand how much that hurts.
I can imagine. Look. No one is saying that he didn't have some tough breaks. The issue here is I don't want everyone to say, "Oh, someone's on drugs," and fear them, because if you say like, "Oh, they're going to end up being George Floyd,"
Right,
then people
yeah.
are going to be less likely to stage an intervention because they're afraid that they get violent.
Right, no.
I've known plenty of drug addicts who don't get violent that way. It's
I
a
agree.
very small percentage of them, and
Very
plenty of
small,
It's a
yes.
very small, and so we can't just blame it on the drugs at that point.
Watch Louder with Crowder live, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern.